What's going on, everyone? It's been a minute since I've done a gaming video at all. I've done like almost every single console so far this year, and I even did this console that I'm going to be talking about now, but I feel like I want to do more like gaming videos, not like me actual gaming, but like gaming console reviewing older gaming consoles, things like that, looking at the impact that it had on the market. I've done that with iPhones and Androids and all these things, and I feel like I want to kind of broaden this, especially going into 2019. I kind of want to broaden what we can do on this channel. So we're going to be looking at the most important Nintendo handheld, in my opinion, that was ever released. Now, I did this actually for the iPhones. I talked about the most important iPhone, and at one point I did talk about the most important Android, I believe. And just like in the iPhone video, I want to take out the first model that was released in this specific niche. So the iPhone video, I took out the iPhone 2G. In this case, I want to take out the first Game Boy, because obviously if you think about it, that was probably the most important one, but it's really no fun. That's kind of like an easy one. It wasn't definitely the best one. It was probably the most important, but taking that out of the equation, I feel like I have an answer of which one impacted the market, especially the effect of this still kind of impacts what the models are released today in the gaming consoles. And in my opinion, I think the Game Boy Advance SP was the most important handheld that Nintendo ever released. Now, if this console itself brought so much, and I did a still worth it video this year talking about how it held up, this and that, but I never really went into detail. Now, looking at this design, the flip out screen, the everything, this design has been obviously copied over with every single Nintendo DS, the DSi, DSi XL, 3DS, 3DS XL, even the 2DS XL. I would say even the Nintendo 2DS got its design from this. I mean, it's more so of the Game Boy, but this console really had a humongous impact on every single one of those consoles, and you have to remember that every single one of those consoles after this, I think the DS oversold the Game Boy Advance SP, which is exactly what you want. I don't know if the 3DS did as well, but this all pretty much initiated from the Game Boy Advance SP. The design, the flip out screen, the inserting the game cartridge on the bottom, which was carried over to the Nintendo DS, things like that. That design was carried over so much that it was super important, and Nintendo knew they had something on their sleeves. Now at the time, I mean, it was a little bit thicker. The Nintendo DS Lite actually kind of narrowed it down and made it a lot better looking, in my opinion. But in this case, the design was very, very good. I even remember looking, and I think the Game Boy Advance SP looked better than the successor, which was the Nintendo DS, the original one. That thing was like the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't know why Nintendo made it so ugly, but the Game Boy Advance SP definitely looked much better in my opinion. Now, like I said, it was kind of weird because the Game Boy Advance SP was released in 2003. The Nintendo DS, the original one, actually got released in 2004, so they were only a year apart from each other. So it was kind of strange and actually kind of cool how they were able to up in the design, because between those two there was a huge upgrade, but the Game Boy Advance SP pretty much initiated that design. Now, another humongous important thing that the Game Boy Advance SP brought was the backlight, and it was still kind of weird because you had to manually turn it on or off, which if you think about it is kind of a feature too, because it kind of saved battery. But having that ability to turn on a backlight, let's say you're in the nighttime or whatever, you can easily play it there even if you're not in direct sunlight now. But for a lot of you kids out there who were like 11 or 12, you didn't have to go through, I'm still pretty young too, I'm a millennial or whatever, but for a lot of people out there who were even younger than me, they probably don't even remember like the Game Boy Advance, the original one, where you had to always be under a light and like playing, and you can't play at night because the Game Boy Advance, the original one, didn't have a backlight. Neither did the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Pocket, all those Game Boys, they didn't have backlight, so you always had to be like in the direct sunlight. If you're going on a road trip, you cannot play without having the car light on, and your mom's going to yell at you for having the car light on, so you had to turn it off. So you had to bring like a flashlight with you. But now our phones and everything have backlights, and it's so easy to look now and be like, oh, that's like not even a big feature, whatever. But at the time, in 2003, that was a pretty revolutionary thing. And the fact that it carried over just really pushed the market into making more and more devices with backlights. So I will say the fact that this thing had a backlight was very, very important. Now, it looks like some models before it didn't have backlights, but the model that I have does. So I guess if you had that model, then you're set. All those things, the design and the backlight, were pretty important. But I think the most important thing, in my opinion, that was carried over and that this specific model brought was the rechargeable battery. Now, this thing is crazy, okay? Battery life on this thing was pretty decent, I would say, okay? I'm pretty used to talking about phones' battery life. I think you can get, from what they said, like 10 hours of battery life. But at this time in 2003, I mean, we had to carry AA batteries. We had to take the battery physically out of the device, you know, and change them out and all those things. And it wasn't rechargeable. And we have phones now that are rechargeable and this and that. But at the time, the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Pocket, all those Game Boy Colors even, they did not have rechargeable batteries. You had to manually take out the battery. But look at the impact that it's had since then with the Game Boy Advance SP. The rechargeable battery was brought into it. It wasn't the first device with the rechargeable battery, but as a gaming device, I think it was one of the first few. And then that rechargeable battery carried over to the DS, and then with the DSi and the 3DS and Nintendo Switch and all those things. I mean, it's pretty insane that that's the case. Now, the weird thing is that with the charging port itself, it was carried over to the original Nintendo DS, but after that with the DS Lite and so on and so forth, they actually changed it out to a different charging port, which was kind of dumb. But again, I totally understand it because it looked much, much better and it made the device be so much slimmer. So I kind of like that initiative that Nintendo put at the time. So the rechargeable battery, amazing. I love this thing. I'm so glad they put it in. And the funniest thing, and I was reading the specs and everything about it, Nintendo actually removed the headphone jack from this in 2003, which is so funny because right now we're seeing a trend with smartphones and like all these different phone manufacturers removing the headphone jacks. And I find it kind of funny that at the time in 2003, Nintendo removed the headphone jack, and even at that time, people were complaining about it too. But then they eventually added it back in with the DS and the DS Lite and all those things. So I find it kind of funny that at the time Nintendo removed it, and then like 10, 12, 13 years later, phone manufacturers would start removing it from their phones too, and their devices. So that's so funny. And now we have the iPad Pro that was just released, and that also removed the headphone jack. So could we possibly say that the Game Boy Advance SP was the initiator of that? I mean, I don't know. You guys answer that. Now, another cool thing was that this was backwards compatible, so with a lot of Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and original Game Boy games, this thing could play, which was also carried over to the DS and also carried over to the DS Lite. When the DSi and DSi XL were released, they actually stopped doing that. They took out the Game Boy Advance slot, which kind of annoyed a lot of people. It annoyed me too, because it's just extra functionality, but you know, that I feel like that kind of pushed the wave of more emulators and things like that. And I kind of respect it too, because the DSi, in my opinion, was a lot slimmer and a lot better looking than the DS Lite. But even at that point, I think the DS Lite was better looking overall. It was just the DSi was slimmer. So, I mean, is it a pro? Kind of, but it was kind of weird that they did it. But the Game Boy Advance SP kept it, and that was actually really, really cool. And this is how I kind of want to wrap things up. You know, the impact that this was more so than just the design and everything. I feel like that was pretty important too. But this also made Nintendo a bunch of money. And in 2009, it was reported that it sold over 43 million units, which is actually insane if you think about it. Because, I mean, there's not a lot of things out there that sell that many units anymore. At the time, I mean, Game Boy Advance, you know, there weren't really that many handheld consoles. I don't think the Sony PSP was released at that point. I think the Sony PSP came out in 2004, 2005, something like that. So this pretty much had a monopoly of what was going to be out. There weren't really that many handheld consoles. I mean, there was like the N-Gage and, you know, phones, I guess, a little bit, but they weren't like smartphones what we have now. So it's pretty insane. 43 million units, that's crazy amounts of money that Nintendo made. And with that money, they were able to go and make the Nintendo DS. They were able to go and make the DS Lite and all these different things. So yes, 43 million might not even sound like a lot anymore, where people are selling hundreds and hundreds of millions of things. But at that time in 2003, it really led the revolution, and it's way more than money. This Game Boy Advance SP, this gaming console, led the revolution for not even Nintendo, but every single other handheld console that was released after this. And now we're starting to see like handheld consoles starting to take a dip down, and nobody's really buying them anymore because we have tablets and computers and phones that can play these games that the gaming consoles can do. But that's kind of in the broad scheme of things. But going and kind of narrowing it down, this is why, you know, I kind of think the Game Boy Advance SP was probably the most important gaming console for Nintendo. Now, obviously, the Sony PSP and all these things I think are better consoles overall, like the DSi and things like that. But you have to respect the Game Boy Advance SP, and nobody really talks about it anymore. People go talk about, like, I mean, even me, I talk about like the PSPs and stuff, but going one step back, I think the Game Boy Advance SP was super awesome, and the impact that it had was crazy. So that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that'll mean so much. But leave some comments. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Do you guys think the Game Boy Advance SP was the most important console? I mean, some people might say the Game Boy Advance, and obviously, like I said, the Game Boy original one was probably the most important, but I wanted to take that out of the equation for this video. But I am kind of curious. My next video will probably be like what the most important handheld console ever was, not even just for Nintendo, but just in general. I mean, there were some pretty big competitors, you know, like the Game & Watch that Nintendo released forever ago. I might have to pick one of them up, but I just ordered all these Game Boys and Game Boy Colors and everything that I'm going to review for next year, so I can't wait for that. But any other questions, leave them down below. Check out the links in the description as well. My Twitter is down there, my Instagram, my second channel. I do a lot more like iOS comparisons and iPhone and Android reviews, but basically like videos I don't have time to make on the main channel, I'll drop them on the second channel, so I would really appreciate if you guys could check that out as well. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out to them.